here because we know what arts can do for young people. The theater, dance, music, they open windows to the world. They help children develop empathy, imagination, identity, and courage. They help them connect with themselves, with others, and with society. And yet, we also know that far too many children around the world are denied access to these experiences. In some cases, it's about funding. In others, it's about infrastructure. And often it is about priorities, about whether the arts are truly seen as a right or still treated as a luxury. In Sweden, for example, depending on where you live or what school you attend, your chances of seeing a performance every year vary dramatically. Some children encounter the performing arts every year, others reach the teenage years without having ever been to the theater. In South Africa, the context is different, but the questions are similar. Our colleagues there are working with the Department of Basic Education to explore the concept of arts-rich schools, schools where the arts are not an occasional treat, but a fundamental part of the learning environment. And that is why we're here, to ask the central question that will guide us through this morning. How can we ensure that every child has access to performing arts in school? This is not just a question for artists or educators, it's a question for all of us across sectors, cultures and continents, because it speaks to the kind of future we are shaping. Today we begin with the situation in Sweden and South Africa, then widen the lens with colleagues from Indonesia, Norway and the United States, each bringing valuable insight and lived experiences from their contexts. We look at systems that work, maybe systems that fail, and the models and ideas that inspire change. And hopefully by the end, we won't just have a clear picture of where we are, we also feel a renewed sense of how we move forward together. So, would you like to say something, Yvette, or should I continue with the Swedish, sort of the presentation of the Swedish? Yes, here. I'd now like to take a few minutes to reflect more specifically on the situation in Sweden, on what access to performing arts in school looks like today, why it matters, and what we're doing about it. Sweden is often seen from the outside as a country with a strong public support for culture and the arts. And in many ways, that's true. We have a long tradition of cultural policy that values access and inclusion. We have state funding structures, regional support systems, and a strong network of professional artists and institutions working with young audiences. But that image doesn't tell the whole story, because when it comes to access to performing arts in schools, to ensuring that every child, regardless of background, actually gets to experience the performing arts as part of their everyday education, the reality is far more uneven. In fact, access to performing arts in schools in Sweden is something of a lottery. It depends heavily on where you live, what municipality you're in, what your school principal believes in, and how local cultural budgets are allocated. There is no national requirement that guarantees performing art experiences in the school system. So some children, often in larger cities or in municipalities that have invested in strong cultural infrastructure, may see professional theater or dance every year. They may go to performances as part of their curriculum. They may also have artists visit their schools to work with them directly. But others, especially in smaller municipalities, rural areas, or schools with limited resources, may go through all the years of schooling without a single meaningful encounter with the performing arts. We've heard stories from teenagers who are graduating from upper secondary school, 17 or 18 years old, who say, "I've never seen a theater performance," or "I thought performing arts were for other people, not for someone like me. And that, to me, is a failure, not of the art sectors, but of our public systems. Because when the art don't reach a child, we don't just lose an audience, we lose a future voice, a future perspective, a future participant in our cultural democracy. So how did we get here? One of the key issues in Sweden is decentralization. Sweden's municipalities are largely autonomous in how they choose to prioritize culture and education. This means there is no national standard or guideline that says, for example, every child has the right to experience professional performing arts at least once per year. It's up to each local authority. Some do a fantastic job, others don't. And without a strong policy framework, it becomes very difficult to advocate for equal access across the country. That's why at SAT Sweden, we've been working for several years now to raise awareness of this issue, not only with the cultural sector, but with politicians, civil servants, educators, and the public. We've launched campaigns, written opinion pieces, held roundtables, and tried to build alliances across sectors. We've spoken directly to the government representatives and asked the big, simple question: what is the government's responsibility to ensure cultural equity for children? Because we believe this is not just about supporting artists or enriching schools. It's about fulfilling the rights of the child. The United Nations Convention on the Right of the Child, which Sweden has incorporated as a law, clearly states that every child has the right to participate in cultural life and artistic life. The National Culture Policy Objectives also specifically states equal access to arts and culture and artistic life. That's not optional, it's a commitment. And schools, where all children are the most natural and powerful place to make this happen. We've also been looking at data, trying to map out who gets access and who doesn't. One of the difficulties is that data on this topic is surprisingly limited. Many municipalities and regions don't track this in any consistent way. That's also part of the problem. If we don't measure access, how can we address inequality? Still, we know enough to say this: the gaps are real, the inequality is real, and without intervention, those gaps will widen, not narrow, especially as cultural budgets come under pressure and schools face competing priorities. But there is hope. We've seen an inspiring example of how things change when local authorities and cultural institutions work together, when artists are welcomed into classrooms, and when school leaders recognize the value of arts for learning, well-being, and democratic engagement. We don't lack models, we lack consistency and political will. So as we continue this discussion today, I'd like to invite you to think with us, not just about how we make performing arts available, but how we make them unavoidable, not just offered, but expected. Because when the arts becomes a regular part of school life, when they are no longer a privilege but a right, we're not just enriching education, we are empowering the next generation. Thank you. And now I will hand over to Yvette.
Thanks, Nicholas, for that very powerful presentation. And hello, everybody. It's so lovely to be here with you. So, ASSATEJ South Africa has been on quite a journey over the last, well, now 18 years, but particularly over the last, I would say, 10 years. In 2015, we started a program which was linked to the fact that in all of our schools in South Africa, we have compulsory creative arts education. So this is a great plus. We actually have it in the curriculum. And part of that curriculum is access to performing arts experiences. So there is a particular topic within the curriculum, which is appreciate and reflect, and it speaks about the need for children and young people to be able to access performing arts experiences in order to be able to appreciate and reflect. We did some research around this initial program, which was a 2-year intervention into schools, which was largely about supporting the creative arts teachers to be able to deliver on the curriculum, because the reality is that despite the compulsory nature of the subject, teachers were completely ill-equipped to be able to teach it. Most teachers had never been trained in the subject. Many of them had had no exposure themselves to the performing arts or the visual arts, and yet they were being expected to teach the subject. And it was often relegated to a kind of homework period or something else. So we did some research over that 2-year period to see what the shifts were in terms of this engagement. And what we discovered was quite surprising. So I need to put my glasses on so I can actually see what I'm reading here. But there are actually 2 questions on this page. I see that only one is there. But have you received any formal training in creative arts? And you can see that that dark gray section of the first pie is the formal training. And you can see the vast majority had no training. And then at the end of, so that was in 2015. That was at the beginning of the project. At the end of 2016, when they'd received the 2-year intervention, we asked the question, has there been a change in your teaching? And as you can see, it was practically 100% that there had been a change in their teaching. And I want to just make it clear that this change in teaching was not just a change in teaching of the creative arts. It was, in fact, a change of teaching across the curriculum, because many of the teachers that we were working with were class teachers. So they were also teaching maths, they were also teaching language, they were also teaching social studies, etc. And they were finding that the intervention that was happening within the creative arts was infusing creativity across the way they approached subjects and was giving them tools to work with children in a more interactive and engaged way in the classroom. And then we asked them about how many of them had observed a change in their relationship with their learners. And as you can see again, it was 100%. So in other words, they noticed that this different mode of engaging with using the arts and working with the arts fundamentally shifted how they and their learners interacted. And we've in fact had several other studies that have been done on this initial data. So there was a master's study that was done at Cambridge, which looked at the shift in power dynamics in the classroom as a result of this work, which was really interesting and very, very positive. And then where are we there? Oh yes, how many teachers see a change in the learners? So again, 100%, they saw a change in the learners. What was that change? So this next slide shows you what the changes were. So things like better discipline, more compassionate, better listening skills, better peer relations, more respect, more interest in the creative arts, more curious, and then very interesting, better school attendance. And I have to say, this wasn't just the learners. Teacher attendance improved as well. Principals commented to us on the fact that their teachers were attending more regularly. And I think that this had a great deal to do with the fact that teachers felt suddenly empowered. They felt engaged, and they felt wanted and needed by the kids because this relationship between them had changed as well. And then there was better academic achievement. So obviously all of this is extremely positive, and this was a case study that was done over 20 schools, comparing them to 20 other schools that didn't get the engagement. And we then continued with this work, and we added other elements to it. And obviously, as I'm sure you know, generally funding comes in it's very project-based, so you have to raise money for a particular kind of project. So sometimes it was a bit bitty, but we were basically continuing in the same way. And then I started to think about the fact that all of the work that we were doing was essentially doing what this indicates, which is that the moment you start to infuse the arts into the school, you start to shift the dynamics and the ecology of that school? And how could we summarize it? How could we talk about it in an easy way? Because we were doing so many different things, some about taking performances to schools, some about working with the teachers, some about doing after hours work, after school work, etc. How could we kind of encapsulate all of this in one concept? So in talking to the education department and in discussing with them the various aspects of what we were doing, we came up with this concept of arts-rich schools. So arts-rich schools are schools that are rich in the arts across what we're calling 5 dimensions. And the 5 dimensions are arts in the school, arts after school, arts as method, arts encounters, and arts in community, and I'll tell you a little bit about each of them in a moment. So, arts in school, that's really where we started. It was about what was already in the curriculum and how the teachers were struggling and how could we assist to make this better. So it's really about the quality of the offering that is happening within the school day, within the subjects of creative arts or dramatic arts, etc. How can we ensure that that is quality? The second dimension is arts after school. So within South Africa, we have so many related and intercolliding issues that we have to deal with. Safety for young people is a huge area. How do we ensure that children are safe after school, that they have something that they can do, that they're not on the streets, that is going to really inspire and motivate them? How do they have an opportunity to follow their interests, even though they may not have the economic means for that? So arts after school is a particularly important area because it's about what happens on the school premises but after the school day, and allows them to extend their arts and cultural experiences. And ASATEJ has done a lot of work in this area in South Africa through our Arts for Youth program, which has been empowered by the Social Employment Fund, which I can tell you about if you are interested later, but just to give you a little snapshot. So this is really about engaging with artists and providing high quality after school experiences. Then the third dimension is arts as method. So arts as method is what we found the teachers starting to do almost naturally when they had more input on the arts, when they themselves have been starting to receive the arts as an engagement, they started to use it naturally as method across other subjects. But we've also started to formalize that. So one of the things that we did through COVID was to create a number of different video examples of how to use the arts as method for teaching in history, for teaching in mathematics, for teaching in science, etc. Working with artists, working with teachers, and coming up with some really inspiring examples of how this can work. And of course, the other element of this, which is very strong in South Africa, is we often have programs that are aimed at dealing with particular societal issues. So at the moment, ASATEJ is involved in a program around gender-based violence, and we've been going into a number of schools. We've been working in 5 provinces on this area. And over the course of the last year, we've created a manual around how do you work with children in the arts around gender-based violence. What are some of the things that you need to bear in mind? If you're making work for children around gender-based violence, what do you need to consider? And if you're making work with children about gender-based violence, what do you need to consider? And what are some of the approaches you can use? And so it's a really handy manual for dealing with this incredibly difficult and hugely pressing social issue within South Africa. So that would be another example of arts as method, not necessarily a subject within the curriculum, but nevertheless an important topic. Then, of course, arts encounters. Arts encounters is really where ASATEJ has always been. It's always been about encountering the professional arts. And ASATEJ South Africa has obviously been very involved in terms of trying to make that access stronger, whether it's about taking theatre to children in their school environment or their community environment, or taking children out of that environment to a festival or to theatres, etc., making sure that that happens. And we are linking that very strongly to where the curriculum requires as I said earlier, this appreciation and reflection. So how can you appreciate and reflect if you're not seeing anything to appreciate and reflect on, you know? And then the last element is about arts in community. And I think this is such an important one, because really what we also saw happening with the schools who had been engaged in our program was that they became more involved in the community, and they became more attractive to the community. Parents were coming to parents' evenings because their children were performing or because there was an art exhibition on the walls. They were engaging with the arts. They themselves were sometimes experiencing the arts for the first time through what was happening within the school. And similarly, the school was being able to benefit from what was available in the community. The local storyteller who has a wealth of stories but isn't necessarily a qualified teacher, who can come in and share those stories with the children, or the local musician who can teach children about indigenous music, etc. So really creating those community links. And then also understanding that the arts can become this very powerful promotional force for a school. So we had one example of a school in the Free State, a primary school in the Free State, which was, the principal told us at our baseline assessment interview, we're a failing school. I don't know whether we're going to be here in a couple of years' time, because we're losing parents all the time. So that was the message at the beginning. At the end of the 2-year program, he said, oh, can you continue with this program, because it's so fantastic. So we did continue. We continued for another 2 years in that school. At the end of that 4-year period, that school was winning all the arts competitions in the province. They had no problem with enrollment, because parents wanted their children to be at the school that was this arts-rich school, that was this winning arts-rich school. So there was something that really shifted in terms of the perception in the community of what the school was about. So then bringing all of these things together, what the plan is with the education department is that we are going to be working on this arts-rich endorsement. So the idea is that you can be arts-rich in any one of these dimensions. You don't have to be arts-rich in all of them. Maybe you're arts-rich in just one of them. That's wonderful, fantastic. You're arts-rich in terms of that. Obviously, if you can add more of the dimensions, it's better. You know, it gives more richness. And so we are looking at how we can accredit schools if they are in 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, 4 dimensions, etc. This is an accreditation that is possible through ASATEJ South Africa in collaboration with the education department. And because we're working in so many schools around the country, we have access on the ground to seeing what's happening in these spaces. The idea is that schools get this accreditation, that it becomes something that they're able to proudly put up in their, principal's office, or perhaps as a sign as you enter the school, as something that they can champion, and that they in turn get championed by the education department, so that at our annual awards ceremonies, for example, where our final year matriculants are, celebrated. So there would also be a celebration of new arts-rich schools, or of champions within arts-rich schools. And then, of course, the other element of this is that ASATEJ South Africa would then be saying, if schools are wanting to become more arts-rich, then they can request one of the programs that we offer in order to try and boost that particular element of arts richness within the school. Of course, this is all wonderful, but the big question is, where does all the money for this come from? Where does the support for particularly that last part come from? And that's really the point that we are kind of grappling with at the moment, is that we can do some accreditation within our current programs. But if, for example, we were to lose some funding for a particular program, it would shrink our reach. It would mean we would not be able to accredit so many schools, etc. So there are quite a lot of questions, and there are a lot of challenges. But I do think that it's a very exciting initiative. It is also a potential initiative, and I mentioned this in Cuba when we sort of introduced this very briefly at the Congress. It's a potential initiative that we could think about replicating around the world, because I think that this connection of what the arts bring to the school environment and the very compelling case of the Sustainable Development Goals and the need for quality education, and the fact that the arts really do contribute to quality education in such a powerful way, I think could be something that we could, as Asitesh centers, all link into and find ways of doing something similar, or of at least boosting this message of the value of arts-rich to arts-rich schools to children and young people, and ultimately to their communities as well. So I think that's it from me, and we'll have time for questions later, I guess, but we're going to now move on to our panelists. So can we invite our three panelists up? So Claire, and Ami, and Tina.
Yes, welcome. We welcome Rashmi Devi Pertama from Indonesia, Tine Valavu Tulden from Norway, and Claire Mason from the United States. And I think we made an order here, so I would like to call firstly for Rashmi to come here from Indonesia. I don't know if you would like to stand here because you have to.
Oh.
You have to click yourself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nicholas. Hello, everyone. Halo, selamat pagi. Good morning. My name is Rahmi. I'm the president of Tamasya Asitex Indonesia. We're one of the new Asitex National Center. Thank you, thank you. Just last month we got accepted by the Asitex. So I'm also an assistant director of the Gulali Festival in Indonesia. So, okay. What is Gulali Festival? And like you can see in the title, what I'm going to share is not formal education, but how to integrating performing arts for children in informal education in Indonesia. And why do we take this as one of strategy to integrating performing arts for children in Indonesia? For this context, let me share some background of my country. Indonesia is an archipelago country. We have 5 big islands and 70,000 islands in total, separated by ocean, the Indian and the Pacific. We are also the 4th biggest population with 280 million approximately. And as a developing country, we lack basic infrastructure, like transport, building, and else. And that makes a significant effect on our education system. The education, of course, is uneven. There are so many remote islands and areas that cannot have a proper education. And even the one that established, sometimes it have difficulty to sustain. While there is an absence in formal school for many remote areas, the need of education filled by the community, volunteers who dedicate themselves for the children. And that's why we start our first festival in 2021. In 2021, we held the first festival of performing arts in Indonesia. It's still in the post-pandemic era, so we held it online. And the second one is in 2023. It's a Biennale festival. And not only festival, but also an open call for new and emerging artists. Program, we call it the Gulali Lab, because we still don't know who Indonesian artists that have worked for the children audience. They may be somewhere out there, but we didn't get connected. So basically, when we start the festival, we don't have artists to perform in our festival. Yeah, that's why the Gulai Lab is a open call program for everyone who have interesting in the performing art for the young audience. So this is the festival in 2021 with 8 artists from Gulali Lab, 2 local performing artists, and 2 invitation group from Japan. The one with a red circle, it's my group. I'm actually one of the artists from the Gulali Lab program. So in 2023, we managed to do the festival offline in Yogyakarta. But then we thinking we have to still keep the online festival as one of our main program, because we just realizing this is a way that can have contribute so much effect in our case, the lack of infrastructure in a remote area. With the online program, we can reach many remote area in Indonesia. Many children can enjoy our performing arts via video and have a chat directly with the artist itself. So the online festival is very helping us much to spread the performing arts for the children and young audiences in Indonesia. This is how the online festival held. It led by program console in Jogja or Jakarta, our capital city. Then the children can watch the video arts, and then do the optic store. They can ask anything, have discussion online. And this is the closer look, what happened in the community house. The volunteer gather the children in one place at the village. Sometimes they also provide some snack or held some game before and after the festival with help from the society in their area. And this is the area that we can reach. We have 38 provinces, and we not yet can reach all of them. But we'll make sure to getting there. Somehow this year, we targeting that we can reach all the 38 provinces. Thank you. And here are the numbers. It's not much, I know, compared to the population that we have. It's a baby step that we have, but we are proud of it because we just start the whole things. So we already have 2 festivals online in 2001, an online and offline festival in 2023. And this year we're going to have the 3rd festival in 2 cities, Yogyakarta and Jakarta. And also the online program festival is still going on. And we have 15 alumni, 8 group of artist alumni and 7 group of artist alumni of Gulai Lab. And we can access 68 children community and Rumah Baca in 50 city or regency, and also 1 Indonesian embassy in Ankara. In total, 3,500 audience for online and offline festival from 2 festivals. And this is not a benefit for the audience, but also for the artists. It opened many access for artists to many places, school, event, and I'm one of the artists. So yes, I get the benefit. This is me with the children performing and also do the workshop. And yes, while we also lack of everything, funding, infrastructure, and the government support, but we think the most essential is how to build the ecosystem itself. Because one thing that we don't lack is people. We have so many of them. So yes, we think we have to, the understanding of the important arts for children in our country is just starting. And that's why we have to amplify them with building the ecosystem itself. So that's why we pursue the Architects Indonesia this year, because we want this to get started much faster. And here we are with 13 members, non-professional theater studio, 3 organizational members, and 1 individual members. And I think with these small members, we're ready to start to act this year. Thank you so much for the ASITES help.
Thank you so much. And now I would like to ask Tina to come here. Tina is from Norway, and from a Swedish perspective, Norway in this area is like a role model. So I'm happy to listen to you now.
Yes, hello. Some of you maybe heard me talking about Scenekunstbruket and the cultural school bag at Say Norway earlier on Tuesday. I won't do such a big presentation now, but keep it to the school, the cultural school bag. But yes, so my name is Tina Valvoa Tyldum. I'm the director of Scenekunstbruket and artistic director of Showbox, our festival. Yes, and I had, and the English name of Scenekunstbruket is by now the Norwegian Network for Performing Arts for Young Audiences. We have to work on a better, shorter English name, I think. But, oh, now it's the spille. So, okay. So, Scenekunstbruket was established in 1994 as a touring network for performing arts, mainly for the project-based performing arts that didn't have a touring system in Norway. And we are now the largest nationwide provider of performing arts for a young audience in Norway. We work for the goal that children and young people from the age of 0 to 20 years, regardless of background, will experience professional quality-assessed performing arts. Last year, we presented 61 different performances, altogether shown 1,967 times, to approximately 167,000 children and young people in Norway. And with that, I need to say that we're just over 5 million inhabitants in Norway as well. So you have the perspective. And although Scenekunstbruket does a lot of other work for the performing arts field for young audiences, much of our good statistics just mentioned is due to the fact that we're the main provider of quality-assessed performing arts to the cultural school bag, which I will call in short DKS, because it's called Den kulturelle skolesekken in Norwegian. So I'll focus on that here, as said. The cultural school bag is a nationwide democratic program to ensure that all school pupils in Norway experience professional arts and culture within all art genres in their school time, and it's mainly at their actual school as well, where they have art meetings in their school time. It has been a consensus in the parliament and have been all government's cultural policy for primary and lower secondary school pupils since 2001. Upper secondary school were later incorporated, so they're also part of the program today. DKS is a collaborative project between the cultural and the education sectors on the national, regional, and local levels, and encompasses all schools in Norway. The counties are responsible for regional coordination and programming, although there also are some municipalities that develop their own programs. But this means that all the counties have their own employees working with programming and coordinating the tours within the different art forms. Also, it's important to say that the main funding from this, for the cultural school bag comes from the surplus of the lottery, the Norwegian lottery system. So it's actually, that is also something that is discussed if it is should become from the state or the Ministry of Culture and Education directly instead. But as for now, that's the way it's funded. Although we are Scenekunstbruket, my organization is funded by the Ministry of Culture, mainly. So, and here are the objectives of DKS. I'm not going to go into all of them, but you can have a look or take a picture if you want. So it's an artistic project but it also is challenged, I must say, when it comes to instrumentalization and how to work together with the school. So that's part of the challenges that has kind of been increased the last years, I must say. So in the performing arts part of the cultural school bag, Scenekunstbruket is the main provider of performances. We are not a producer, but we select complete productions for inclusion in our artistic repertoire. So artists and companies and also some institutions apply, and a committee of consultants, which is our artistic board or council, representing a wide range of expertise in the field of performing arts, make recommendations as to which productions should be chosen to be in our repertoire. And they have pretty amazing discussions, I must say, between them in discussing the quality of the performances. By now, also important to say, the minimum one of the consultants need to see the performance live, and the rest can see it on video. In our repertoire now, we have 155 performances that are active in the system. The counties themselves then program from the repertoire, which creates a distributed system that gives both economy, art and programming competence, and a distributed decision-making to the counties. That's also important, that it's not centralized, that actually the counties can also get into what the region, what age groups they should prioritize for performing arts the different years, or visual arts or different genres within the art sector. Yes, and then I need to say also that the counties do program productions outside of our repertoire as well. But one of the main tools for providing quality assessed performing arts is the financial support Scenekunstbruket has for the organizers and for the regions. Because when your county is a member of, and all the counties in Norway are, a member of Scenekunstbruket's network, they receive a refund that can be up to 50% of the costs involved in presenting the productions that are selected by from our repertoire. So it's an initiative to program quality assessed performances. And unfortunately, due to no increase in the funding for the last 10 years, there are now only, in 2024, they received 19% refund. So we're also facing cuts or no increase, at least, in the funding system that challenges also the production sizes that the regions choose. We're afraid that it will end up being one performer coming to the schools instead of bigger productions. But yeah, so the refund system is also, when the counties get the refund, they are also required to use the funding to program performing arts for the coming year. So that makes this a system that works, every year. So yes, the organizers are a big part of developing the performing arts for young audiences in Norway. And then I think we can get back to things in the panel. Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much, Tina. And now we will move from one small country to a much bigger country. Claire Mason from the United States.
All right, Hi, everyone. So I'm Claire Mason. I'm an assistant teaching professor at Purdue University, which is in Indiana in the United States. So Indiana is sort of right in the middle, as it were. And as has been mentioned, the United States is a huge country with a lot of different approaches. And I really can only speak to rural approach. And there are a lot of different ways that people are able to reach young people in schools to bring performances, and it is often a little easier in large cities, places where the infrastructure is there, where the performers are there, where the theaters are there. It can be easier. Money is a barrier, of course, but there are ways in which you can get performances. The main issue, quite similar to Sweden, I think, is this sense of how do you reach the young people who are in towns of 50, maybe 60, who have to take a bus an hour to get to their school, who have maybe 2 to 3 hours away from any large city. And so that's one of the really interesting things that you can see, and I'll talk to you specifically about the states of Wyoming, Wisconsin, and Indiana, all three of which are heavily conservative areas. They have less funding for the arts. It's thought of as being less important. And so while there is arts there, being able to reach those young people can be a challenge. So there are sort of three main sections that I'll talk about. And the first one is traveling to the schools. Probably the easiest way for the young people to be able to experience theater is for the theater to come to them. And that's where I think the university is quite an interesting partner and can be very helpful. That universities in all of the states, so every state in the United States has at least one major four-year university, and then often 2 to 200 community colleges. And so in the state of Wyoming, for example, Wyoming is, there are 500,000 people in the second largest state of the country. It takes up to 10 hours driving like 80 miles per hour, 100 kilometers per hour across the state. It's a massive landmass with very few people in it. And so one of the main things that happens, the University of Wyoming has students who are tour, and then also there are community colleges that will go around as well. Wisconsin has something similar. The University of Wisconsin-Madison has programs where their students will create pieces that will then go around to various places. And then Indiana does some similar things as well. I think you can see them across multiple different states. This idea of the performers going to the school itself, like Shakespeare in a Suitcase, for example, where you show up with your bag, you perform in the gym or in their cafeteria or in their public square, things like that, that you can kind of go to them. The other sort of main way of doing it is busing them to you. And so one of the places where that becomes quite interesting is finding cultural centers that have spaces that can work. Because of course, a student who is in a school that's 5 hours away, they can't bus to where your theater is. It isn't practical. And so that's where, when I was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, we had this really interesting connection with the Taliesin. It's a famous architecture who has this house that has a theater in it. And so we were able to sort of help bring students from rural communities in Wisconsin to this theater. So they were able to see the production so that they were not having to come all the way to Madison. Instead, we kind of had that kind of meeting point in the middle. And the other way that kind of works is thinking about how we have them be the own performers in their schools. And that kind of can come through a variety of different ways. Some of it is helping create teachers who know and are interested in using pedagogy and using creative practice. Some of it is in things like playwriting, having playwrights who then come into the schools and then they work with the young people who create their own scripts, and then those scripts are performed by professional actors or student actors who come in and then bring those stories to life. There are other ways in which there are touring companies like Missoula Children's Theater. They have this, this musical program that they set up where they have a truck and two acting director leaders, facilitators who drive around the country, and they kind of bring the set to the schools, and then they have this musical that they bring the students into, and then they learn it, and then they perform it. So there are ways in which we can do sort of grassroots, ground up, that we can also then bring it in. And of course, all of this is dependent on funding. And that's where things become quite difficult and also interesting. There used to be quite a large amount of funding, which granted, across the whole country is limited resources, but there are arts grants and ways in which one can ask for money to do these things. Universities are also quite useful partners when it comes to figuring out how to go into the schools, because often there are funds that are allocated in the university system. In the United States, this is becoming more and more difficult as funding becomes locked with certain things that are needed in order for one to be able to use those funds. But there are ways in which grassroots funding can help create. There's also ways in which we can advocate for the teachers and the student teachers in university settings to have performance arts training. And there are ways that which, when we reach out, universities love to have performing arts reach out to us, and we reach out to them to create even larger partnerships between the institutions. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, now we have heard 5 presentations about the situation in 5 different countries and parts of the world, from Sweden and Norway with small populations, and from South Africa, somewhere in between, and Indonesia and United States with millions and millions and millions of inhabitants. To start a discussion, I'm thinking in Sweden, for us, it's not the funding that is the biggest problem, because there are a lot of money within the system, so to say. The problem is that it's so fragmentaric. And in many cases, it's very project-based. Municipalities and regions, they have funding for a project for 2 or 3 years. People work a lot, create systems and structures, and actually reaching many schools during these 2 or 3 years. But when the project ends, everything goes back to as it was before. And all this funding and all this work has been done for sometimes nothing. So that's the main problem in Sweden. And I'm thinking of what you described, Yvette. How do you work to make it long-lasting? How do you do to make it nationwide, sort of?
Yeah, I mean, hello? Yeah. So I think that was very much around the thinking of the Arts-Rich Schools ideas, is that we needed something that was going to be systemic and that was going to be built into the system on some level, that was going to take it away from just the individual projects that pop up, which are wonderful and rich in their own right, but which, as you say, they finish and then, you know, those kids benefited, but there's no continuity. And I think the other side of it was we also needed to make it something that that schools and principals and decision makers, and then hopefully also eventually parents, because they would be influenced by this, would start to see as something compelling and attractive and important. Because I think, you know, you mentioned it as well, that it depends so much on people's priorities. And there are so many competing priorities. And just, you know, so we have been lucky in a sense in that we've had this compulsory subject of creative arts within the schools, which is not the case in many countries. You know, there isn't always an art subject within schools as a compulsory element. However, it is under threat. I mean, right now we've just had another amount of time taken off creative arts at the intermediate phase to go to coding, you know. So there are a lot of other priorities, technology, maths and science obviously is always really strong. Within the South African context also, if you were to sort of put sports and arts next to one another, sports would definitely win, So it's like, how do we make arts valuable to people? How do people start to understand what that value is? And so I think that the more we can, first of all, recognize where it's happening and then show the ripple effects of it, that it's not just, it is about this wonderful experience, but it's not just about that. It's also about the other things that it does. And hopefully that brings more people to start to buy into it. We are at a point where we have the buy-in, we don't fully have the mechanism, if you know what I mean. Like the education department is saying they're going to create this recognition structure, but they haven't concretely done it yet. They've given us some indications of what it might be, but they haven't actually implemented it yet. But we're hoping that within the next couple of months we're going to get that clarity, because just before I left we had some conversations which seemed positive. So if we can get the education department to really push this, then I think that would be an amazing step. So I think, going back to your question, it's about how do we get the highest level of decision makers involved in buying into, whatever the mechanism is that we're going to use.
Another question that I would like to raise with all of you maybe is, you talk about values. In Sweden we have now, since a couple of years, a conservative government. And when it comes to school issues, they are very much sort of back to basic. It's reading, it's math, it's the hard issues sort of that they are focusing on. And culture then becomes a minor or a lesser important part in their minds, so to say. So we find it very difficult to talk about culture and performing arts in schools, because they always refer to these European PISA exercises or investigations, and they rate Sweden lower and lower and Finland higher and higher, and that's a big concern for the government. So how in your countries, how does the politicians, how does the politics view culture and performing arts? Is it something that's on the agenda, or is it something that you have to fight for all the time?
I can start. Yes, we have to fight all the time. I think, and it's much the same situation in Norway as in Sweden when it comes to politics, but what we have been talking about lately, at least, to start with that, how we got because actually when the cultural school bag was established, we actually managed to get the right-wing party in Norway also engaged in it. And that's how they did that, I think, was mainly because they talked about how we were giving something to the children, not using kind of art rhetorics. So that was how, and this is something that the children deserves in some way. So that's mainly how they got on board, that it was a consensus in the parliament from all the parties that this was an important democratic project. But we've also been talking in many different contexts in Norway the last years, because we have also had a real increase in aesthetics subjects in the schools for many years, because we had not a right wing, but a right government for 10 years, where math and the PISA is kind of the only thing, it seems at least, that is how they develop the school subjects, where math and Norwegian and English and science are their main focus. But I think that we need to be better as a cultural sector and arts sector to actually get a language that is easy for them to understand. because I think we have been, in Norway, we have been kind of fortunate compared to very many other countries. So we have been lacking how to, together as the art sector, to raise the language in how we speak about the importance of art. And what it contributes to in the mildly said chaotic world we live in today, that it has the democratic or contributes to the democratic perspectives, able to be a meeting place where you can discuss and create a space where you can discuss something you have experienced together without and that you can it can be a place where you're allowed to disagree and learn how to talk with each other in a safe space, kind of. And as you said, Niklas, also, yeah, the different viewpoints and empathy and humanity, which is what we need more than ever, and critical thoughts, and also how the arts is where you actually can imagine what the future could look like, and that you're able to see different talk about and experience different ways of how the world could look. So I think we can always like push, it's easy to push the responsibility towards others, but in Norway I think now we really need to gather in the art sector to be even more specific about what the arts actually does to us as humans in a way. Yeah.
Thank you. Claire and Rami?
So the United States is in a quite precarious position when it comes to politics and how politics are getting in and how that's operating in culture. I would say even before our current situation, there was a really interesting sense in that the United States is quite transactional, and parents are often far more interested in how their children can make a living and be rich and successful than they are necessarily interested in their children being happy. And so I think there's a sense in which STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math are often prioritized. And so schools will cut their arts programs, they'll cut their theater programs, they'll cut their music programs so that they can have a stronger science program, so that they can have a better football team, American football team. And so there's a sense at which like what will get you into college, what will get you your degree, what will get you the job at the bank, what will get you the house with the 2-car garage, is often a higher priority. And so one of the ways in which we advocate is to sort of lean into that and just talk about the importance of aesthetics and talk about the importance of thinking about your consumer, using their language, so thinking about your consumer, thinking about your user interface, thinking about your design process as a way of talking about how what we know is being culturally enriching, being a good human, having an interesting, active imagination, finding joy and wonder in the day-to-day, and then sort of repackaging that in the language that is understood. It's, I think, sad that one has to do that, but it can be quite useful. At the university I'm in, I teach at a Cornerstone Integrated Liberal Arts program, which is now all of our Polytechnic Institute students have to take our classes for a humanities-based curriculum. They have to think about different plays, they have to think about different kinds of art, like that's part of what they need to do to get their degree. So there's ways in which schools are starting to see the importance of the arts in making better engineers as well as making better humans. And we really lean into the better human part, but you then, sort of package it to the purse strings, as it were, as also like, I can design a better rocket if I think about theater, which I think is actually genuinely true. The other thing that then becomes a problem right now is that culture is extremely important to our current administration. The downside to that is the culture that is important to them is often counterintuitive to the culture that is important to theater for young audiences. And so thinking about how now we approach a society that's very parent first, it's not the rights of the child, it's the rights of the parent. And what makes the parent uncomfortable, what makes the parent upset, what makes the parent whose child isn't even in the school upset, becomes of great importance. And so now one of the biggest challenges is figuring out how to navigate both how you articulate, how you discuss, how you pitch your process, as well as what you're actually doing, and avoiding the words that will get you in trouble without having to avoid the content that you really want to do. So there's a lot of malicious compliance involved in how the arts are working, and I think will continue to work. They're not going to go away, but now artists are really having to decide, do I put myself at risk, or do I find a way to sneak the idea into the process that the children will pick up, but we might be able to kind of get under the fence, as it were, for the parents.
Okay. Actually, the government in Indonesia is quite not too conservative, so they know how it's important. So, and also we have so many festival, traditional performance. Also, they also support for the production for the movie, literacy and else. But I think the main problem is there's also so many of us, and the source of funding is so limited. So like I had the audience with the ministry, assistant of ministry education last month, and he's very open to our festival concept. He wants to support us. And he also an ex-pop singer in Indonesia. So he's really understand what importance of the art for the young audience also. But again, it's because we're not a rich country, and there's so many artists, festival organizers need this funding. So sometimes they cannot distribute evenly. We can get this funding this year, but maybe not the next year. So somehow we have to survive ourselves. Like for the festival, we had some fundraising, like we collaboration with the visual artists that create our merchandise and logo, and then we have an action to get the funding to support our festival, something like that. Or we collaboration with an author, a children author in Indonesia, to make the work with her book character, and then we sell the ticket much higher to get the fund, something like that. We just have to think creatively to support ourselves. But we know the society also help us, because like if we want to do some performing in one gallery, we can always talk to them, explain to them, and they're willing to help without we have to pay for the rent of the place, something like that. So we may not be of course the government also have some restricted, and we not too freely to expressing the art itself, but I think that's the main problem is, yeah, there's so many of us, so many of us, and so little funding that they have for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So we'd like to open it up to the audience now. We do have mics that can rove, so if anybody has a question that you'd like to ask of any of the panelists, any one of the five of us, or comments or suggestions.
Thank you. I have basically a follow-up question for the last answers. and it's about continuity. Do you have some kind of communication strategies also for media? Because I mean, like, to give feedback, maybe positive, maybe negative, to the politicians, admins, performers, but also to grow awareness of the wider audience who is not maybe involved, or to produce, I don't know, uproar from the media for the wider audience when people trying to take away from your funds or something like that. Do you have it? Which kind of strategies you have? This is my question for you.
Who would like to take that?
So I would say there are attempts in the U.S. to have media uproar. I'm not sure they're effective. So there are, people will write opinion articles, op-eds for newspapers, and people will give interviews on television shows. They will create hashtags. They'll use Blue Sky. They'll use Instagram. They don't use Twitter very much anymore, but they used to use Twitter. So there are ways in which social media was used to bring awareness. There were ways in which sort of traditional outlets were used to bring awareness. I'm not sure they did much, to be completely honest. There is so much media in the United States. It's so saturated and it's so siloed that really the only people who are seeing your ideas are the ones who agree with you anyway. And so there's very little ability, I think, to communicate across bounds unless you go to the spaces where you're probably not wanted. And there's some gatekeeping there. And so I think one of our biggest challenges is figuring out how to craft our needs and to sort of rage into the light, as it were. And so I think figuring out how do we talk to those who will never, ever, ever see the media outlets who are publishing, because they will only watch this one news channel and they will never, ever look at any other news channel. They will only read this blog and they'll never look at these, don't listen to this podcaster. So then how do we engage with those media outlets in a way that they would be receptive? And I think that is a monumental challenge at the moment. I don't think it's insurmountable, but it's definitely a problem.
Did you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we have had a lot of discussions in how we meet the opinions that comes from really religious conservative parents or politicians that write about the cultural school bag, that they get exposed to queer, to different kind of topics that are difficult for them. And a month ago, we chose to actually answer one of the politicians who has been really trying to create a question or questionize how the cultural school bag take up different issues. And so and then I wrote an answer to him because he actually went into pretty criticizing directly some of the artists in our repertoire. So she contacted us, and then we were like, okay, we can't stay silent. I think it's important now that we, in this kind of territory, it feels more and more important to actually try to, but it's difficult because you're always afraid to get the a shitload back, to be honest. But we were really trying in the answer to him to be categoric about the professionality, that this is a system that has so many considerations done before the performance enters the stage for the students. So to take down his assumption that this is just something they've thrown into the students. Because I'm so sick in Norway of the downspeaking of art as an actual profession in a way. So that was our attempt to do that. And he hasn't commented anything on it, still, at least for now. We'll see.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to add just one thing around this communication thing. I think that the Take a Child to the Theatre campaign has been an extraordinarily successful campaign in many parts of the world, but in South Africa in particular. I've been so impressed over this last period, because we've been in the campaign, at just how many people are taking up the campaign who we never thought would take it up before, or imagined. It's really grown, and I think the idea of having this sort of single message that people can align with, and that is repeated, and that isn't, we don't change it, we don't fiddle with it. I mean, we may interpret it differently each year with a new message or whatever, but essentially it's the same thing. It's been very effective in drawing more people to it and sort of growing a voice around it. So I do think there's something about consistent messaging that is important, yeah. Where's the mic gone?
And the mic is here. We're just waiting for the responses. Thank you very much. I think I want to touch on the point that has just been made, and it's around getting the language that could be easy to be understood. I find that to be quite important, because sometimes we tend to almost like celebrate being inaccessible, and that may not work in our best interest. So when Yvette talks about the simple message that could be understood widely, I find great resonance in that. In fact, Einstein has this frame that I always find fascinating, that if you can explain it to a 6-year-old, perhaps you yourself do not quite understand it. So I think the intentions, if I'm just reflecting on the South African story, the intentions also drive the vision, because sometimes the arts could also be used in a way that it may drive divisions. So finding that balance is actually quite important, because the arts are quite powerful. But I think when we highlight the benefits of democratized arts as something that levels the playing, it could be useful. So for me, this cultural equity program and vision, it's a language that I find that it could be quite interesting. At the workshop yesterday, just to grapple with what is cultural equity was quite interesting. Claire, I didn't quite, if you could just also let me know about the third point. It was traveling to schools, buzzing to artists. I don't know what the other third approach could be.
Oh, the third approach is where the students perform themselves. So rather than having professional artists or university students who go to the schools, or schools who go to the professional artists, the students, the young people themselves become the artists. And that can be slightly easier because you only need to bring one professional to them to help raise it. But I think there's a variety of different ways. That one can be very helpful. Also, I think to communication as well. Often the parents who are the most resistant to theater are less resistant when their own child is performing and excited to be performing. And that, I think, often opens doors that no social media post could ever open. And so I think there's something really important about getting the young people to perform themselves.
A very quick question. You mentioned, Rami, the informal education and that idea of the grassroots connection. And I'm really interested, because it follows on to all of this, what's the subversive way we can come from up from under to place all that? Have you seen, or can you gather the information around the impact of that informal education approach, that community approach?
Why we start with the informal first, yeah. Okay, I think because it's not easy to get access to the school when they still not understand what we are trying to do, what we are trying to offer. Because TYA, Theater for Young Audiences in Indonesia, is quite not new, but I think it's not everyone already get the point, can accept that. So if we pursue to the school system, it will take a more time to get through it. But the informal education system is more casually. We can talk with them more personally, and also that's the fastest way to reach the whole children in our province. Because if we have to go travel to one island and to another island just to get into the school system, it's not practically it's so expensive. It's so expensive. Even myself, I've never been to the Borneo Island, the Kalimantan, because the flight is so expensive. It's much cheaper for me to go to Singapore, to Malaysia. So, yeah, that's the problem with us.
Can I just ask for a clarity on that? So in terms of the informal education system, how do you see, what is informal education in your context?
It's more like the community house, like community library. It's just a way to get children access to the books. Sometimes they also teach maths or how to read. The volunteer in the community house.
Yes, yes.
Something like that.
Yes, yes. Yeah. I mean, that's interesting as well because it's something that we also work with in South Africa. So we work with a lot of community arts center spaces and a lot of community library spaces and that kind of thing. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, Yvette, you have like 3 minutes to summarize this.
Goodness. Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's been a very rich discussion, and it's so interesting to see the variety of approaches and the degrees of formalization, in a sense. You know, we've had everything from this very complex and well-established system, which, yes, has its challenges, but nevertheless is quite an icon, really, in terms of provision of the arts within schools, through, you know, systems that I would still look at and go, wow, you know, that's still, in terms of what Sweden is able to do, it may be uneven, but at least, you know, there is funding there and there are things happening in a great deal of the country, to systems that are trying to be established, in the case of South Africa, where we're already trying to make something happen, but we're not there yet at all, to a variety of approaches in both of your instances, which are, you know, from really sort of regional in a sense, and then also very community-based in terms of the ways that you're working. And I think that there's so much to gain inspiration from here. And it's so interesting that regardless of which of these levels of refinement we are looking at, we are all facing certain challenges. There are political challenges in terms of convincing those who have the power that this is in fact an important aspect that needs to be supported. There are financial challenges in all cases. And I think the big financial challenge is really this thing of how do we move away from ad hoc and, you know, sort of project-based and once-offs into something that is more consistent, more dependable. Is that even possible? You know, I mean, I think your system in terms of the idea of the refund and being able to then invest into the future is such a beautiful concept. I'm not sure that we're necessarily going to find exactly that same model in other places, but but this idea of how do we take what we're doing now and invest it into the next year of the program, I think that concept is a really important one for us to hang on to and to think about within our own contexts. So yes, we've political challenges, financial challenges, and then also just the you know, I think that we all recognize, obviously, that the schools can be an incredibly important space for access to the arts. It is the one place where all children, almost all children, let's put it that way, almost all children can be reached, you know. I mean, we do still in South Africa, for example, have children who are outside of the school system completely. So, you know, there are other challenges there. But it is such an important space to engage with. But I think that there's also still a challenge also around sometimes encouraging the professionals to want to engage with this space. And there are professionals who would look at the idea of touring into schools or whatever and think, that's not for me, you know. And so how do we shift that mindset as well? How do we make something of real quality happen in a classroom? And how do we find ways to take classrooms to places where real quality is happening? So yeah, a lot of challenges, but a lot of inspiration as well. And I really want to thank each of you for bringing your stories and your experiences, and also all the work that represents. Because this is not just something that you're talking about, this is something that you're doing every day. And your investment in this work is making a real difference to children and young people on the ground. So thank you so much for that work. And thank you for being part of this panel. And thank you all for being part of the audience today. And enjoy the rest of the gathering.